Good afternoon. I would like to start my talk with a backcasting exercise. Backcasting is a planning method where you envision a future that you would like to see and then think about the concrete steps it would take you to get there. So imagine yourselves 50 years from now on a mountaintop staring down at the valley below you. What would you like the world to look like? And what would it be? Now, given the world that you envision, how can you create it starting from today? Now, I'd just like to give you some information about where the world is and where we're currently headed. The world has lost about 80% of its natural forests. There's a prediction which said that by 2050, there'll be more plastic in the oceans than there are fish. And according to the National Academy of Sciences, the world is headed to the 6th mass extinction. We've wiped out 52% of the world's wildlife since 1970. And if you look at the carrying capacity of the Earth in green, and the red is actually our human impact, you can see that when it comes to biodiversity loss, the nitrogen cycle, or climate change, we are far beyond our limits to growth. This means that we're headed towards an ecological catastrophe which threatens human existence on this planet. So what can we do? How can we change? I've spent about my entire career trying to figure out ways to solve this problem. I've worked both on an international level and also on a local level, working on sustainable development projects. And what I found with all the projects I was working on is that the degree to success or failure in any one of them was dependent on the degree to which education played a role. Over time, I realized that education is the key to change. If you look at the ecological challenges we face, like climate change or transition towards a green economy, most people know that we face environmental problems, but they don't do anything about it. We live in one of the most educated civilizations in the history of humankind, but we're destroying the planet. There's a gap between what we know and what we do about it. And this is where education for sustainable development plays a fundamental role. Education for sustainable development seeks to transfer sustainability-related values, skills, and knowledge to people. The main goal is to provoke skills and to change behavior that can help ensure a healthy environment for human beings, both now and in the future. And I've come up with 4 very straightforward principles on how to bridge this education gap. The first one is that sustainable development must be integrated into formal education. If you look about where children learn their values and skills, they learn it primarily in 3 places. The first one is the family, the second one is through media, and the third one is through the classroom. We live in a day and age where both parents now are having to work and work more often in order to make ends meet for their family. And children are spending more time on social media, on the internet, and also watching television shows like Keeping Up with the Kardashians or MTV Cribs. And with these shows, of course, they're teaching negative values like consumerism and consumption. So where do children learn how to become positive citizens on this planet? The answer is the classroom. The classroom is the only place where children spend 5 days a week from the time they're 7 years old to the time they're 18 years old, learning skills, values, and knowledge from teachers. Just think about the time when you were in school. How much of who you are and how much of that experience shaped who you are today. This is why formal education must include sustainable development. Now, there's been several international mandates like the UNECE Strategy on Education for Sustainable Development, the UNESCO Global Action Plan on Sustainable Development, and of course, most recently, the 2015 Sustainable Development Goals, which all said and emphasized the need to integrate sustainable development into formal curricula. But not much has been done on that field. And the question is, why? Well, the reason is because formal education is very difficult to change. The educational curricula is one of the most conservative most conservative systems in all social systems on this planet. Fortunately, though, I have the opportunity to lead a large framework program called Education for Sustainable Development from 2012 to 2017, and the aim of this project was to integrate sustainable development into the formal curricula in the countries of Kosovo, Serbia, and Montenegro. This project was recognized as a best practice of the Decade on Education for Sustainable Development and was also presented at several international forums, including the UNESCO World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development in Nagoya, Japan. And these international recognitions let us know that we were on the right track and we were doing the right thing with this project. And together in partnership with the Ministries of Education and National Pedagogical Institutes, we successfully integrated sustainable development into the formal curricula in all three countries through a passage of a series of educational reforms that were approved by the National Councils of Education. And this seems like a very difficult task to achieve, seems almost impossible. Well, fortunately, there were broader educational reforms which were happening as part of the global shift to the outcome-based learning approach to education. And this approach means learning to do rather than learning to know. It's measuring students' performance at the end of the year based on the skills that they can perform, based on the knowledge that they know, rather than the knowledge itself. And this whole process started because educators were finding that students were graduating from high school and from universities and didn't have the concrete skills needed to be effective in the workforce. So countries all over the world reformed their curricula in line with this international trend of education. Unfortunately, this process did not emphasize sustainability skills into these broader educational reforms. Educational curricula takes years to pilot and remains in place for generations. And when you think about transitioning towards a green economy or developing the renewable energy resources we need to reduce our impacts on climate change, it's critical that children learn skills related to solving these issues now. And I will give you an example of some of the learning outcomes that we developed in Serbia. And the whole idea of these learning outcomes that we developed, which was actually several hundred in many different subjects in all three countries, was to try to solve these problems and try for students to learn these skills in order to be more effective citizens of the future and to make the green economy we need of the future. And so, for example, in the subject of biology, students must know the factors affecting pollution of land, water, and air to understand and predict the consequences of the use. And in physics, students must know the ways of energy saving in the household, including cooking, insulation, and energy-saving light bulbs. Not only did we integrate these sustainability skills into standard subjects like math and science, but also subjects that don't traditionally emphasize them, like civics, physical fitness, and engineering. And this is the cross-curricular approach to education for sustainable development. So if you think about the topic of climate change, it can be taught in any subject you could possibly think of. So in economics, for instance, students can learn about the economic impacts of climate change. In engineering, students can learn how to develop the renewable energy resources needed for the transition towards a green economy. In political science, students can learn about the international laws connected to climate change and how it will impact their country or their community. In history, students can learn about the historical use of fossil fuels and its impact on the increase in carbon dioxide emissions and how that impacted the climate. And in sociology, students can learn about the social impact of climate change, both in their communities, in their nation, and globally. Now, it's important to stress that this is for formal education, but education for sustainable development and sustainable development in general must be integrated into all aspects of our lives, no matter what field we work in and no matter what our profession is. We need the doctors, the lawyers, the teachers, the bankers, the economists of the future to think about how to create a future that we all hope for and want. So another important aspect when you try to get sustainability across to the public is to try to use key messages. So I've spoke about sustainability to politicians, to local community members, and to students, and also developed a whole array of different educational tools for children and for high school students. And what we try to do every time we talk about sustainable development is to use 2 key points, no matter what the issue is connected to sustainable development. So if you think about the topic of water, for instance, what are the 2 main take-home messages you would want people to know in relation to water and sustainability? One is that we need to conserve water because we have a limited amount of it. And 2 is that we need to reduce pollution because we rely on water to drink and for our survival. So these key messages can be operationalized through concrete skills and activities, both for students and for the general public. So you can teach the engineers of the future how to develop low-flush toilets, or how to create low-flow irrigation systems for agricultural crops, or how do people reduce their amount of water consumption. Do you leave the water running when you brush your teeth? Do you leave the water running when you wash the dishes? Changing these small things make an enormous impact when you talk about sustainable development. And so I'd just like to summarize the 4 key messages. And being a CEU alumni, I call them the CEU principles. So first is to cross-cut. Second is that education for sustainable development is for formal curricula. You need to educate for outcomes, and you need to use key messages. And I feel slightly guilty, but not really, stealing this slide from Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth sequel movie, because I think it really takes home the message that I want to get across today. And this was a picture taken in 1972 by the Apollo 17 space mission, and it was the first picture taken from outer space to the planet Earth. And actually, this picture led to the environmental movement in the 1970s and the first Earth Day. And the reason why is that people, for the first time, were able to realize the fragility of the Earth and the fact that we don't have infinite resources and that we live in a finite planet with finite resources and that there's limits to our growth. So I'd like to end by saying that I started this program with an idea to maybe make some small change, and it led to a big educational reform process which basically educated generations of students and probably thousands of students. So it's up to all of you to think of how you can contribute to sustainable development and how you can do it in your field. And remember that sometimes small ideas lead to big changes, and it's up to each and every one of you to save the planet. Thank you.